And also too, I'm sure everyone's heard about the latest machete attack on a guy in Britain. And it says, it was two, I don't know if they were African men, cutting up a white fella. They say it was a soldier, maybe off-duty soldier. And there's different stories. Some say these two guys were driving a car. They knocked him down first, jumped out, and they started hacking him to death with knives and a machete, although what you see in the photograph is actually a butcher's cleaver that one of them had on him. And it says, from the Mail Online, it says they were chopping and cutting him. Shocked eyewitness tells of horrific machete attack on soldier. And then you go into soldier beheaded in Woolwich, machete attack. That's the latest thing. I don't know if they cut his head right off him. That's from the Telegraph. And it gives you live coverage and so on as the police deal with what was believed to be two shootings and a machete attack. Well, two shootings were from the cops who arrived on the scene and shot the two guys. And then it says, on The Guardian, it says, dramatic footage of the suspected terrorist attack near the Woolwich barracks today that left one man dead has emerged, showing a man with blood-covered hands using jihadist rhetoric to justify the violence. And this jihadic rhetoric was the fact that they were getting back at Britain for being involved and doing what we've been doing for years now, and involving all these Muslim countries, basically. Anyway, this had to happen eventually, as they always bring the wars home with them. And this has been a long, long protracted war. It's not over yet. They've got other countries to take out yet under the big plan, as they standardize the country under a forced democracy, is what I want to call it. Not that we have democracy, but this had to happen eventually. And there'll be more of it, unfortunately, which means the whole country is kind of locked down under martial law, in a sense, fighting terrorism. It's perpetual terrorism. All started with Tony Blair, remember? The only man who wanted to be on board with the US and go into Iraq, and Afghanistan. But again, the Project for New American Century group, published in the 90s, they had all those countries listed to be taken out. And that's what they've done. As I said, some more to go. And there'll be more and more of this. And plus, too, with the multiculturalism, they've made sure that they can now make your country into a war zone with kind of martial law techniques and so on. They knew this. They set up the chessboard long before they invaded with massive, the other night I read about the massive immigration under Blair's regime, because they couldn't get enough working folk in Britain anymore to basically vote far left. They mean actually communists. They couldn't get the folk to vote that way anymore. So they imported them. That was the reason, the claim that they brought them all in, lots of them, and still bringing them in. But it's also part of the EU project, European Union project. The European Union project isn't simply free movement of goods. It's also labour, but not just labour from the EU. It's from all across the world, especially from third world countries. So this is part of the end product of this too. But the big boys who planned it knew what they're doing. And also this article here, because it's not just in England this is happening, and Stockholm in Sweden have had riots for the third day and night in a row. And it says cars and buildings were smouldering early Wednesday after a third straight night of rioting around Sweden's capital and what's become the country's worst outbreak of civil unrest in years. 8 people were arrested overnight, bringing the total since the violence began Sunday to 15. And it says at least 5 people were being held in charges, and that more arrests were likely after video shot at the scene was reviewed. The disturbance was reported in 6 areas as the violence spread around Stockholm. More than a dozen people torched cars, and actually hundreds of cars got torched, and houses too. And it's right in this multicultural ethnic area where they bring in lots of immigrants. I'll put a couple of articles up tonight on it. And this is going to happen more and more. And that's followed by this article here. It says multiculturalism is failing, says the Swedish Prime Minister, and who pleads for order as the riots engulf Stockholm suburbs. And it says hundreds of youths hurling rocks, burning cars and smashing windows for the second day in a row in Stockholm say they're protesting against police brutality and inequality. Mind you too, there's professional agitators that don't even belong to their groups. They belong to other groups who are behind this too, making sure they do agitate. It says in Sweden, critics of the multiculturalism policies lash out at immigration laws. 7 policemen were injured, at least 10 cars and countless containers set on fire, dozens of windows smashed in several heavily immigrant-populated neighbourhoods of the Swedish capital Tuesday. Police said some 300 people are now taking part in riots, which started in protest against the shooting of a man allegedly armed with a knife in the Stockholm district of Husby. The protesters also cited beatings and discriminative derogatory remarks of the officers. But a lot of them will say that too, regardless. The protesters are mainly young, the police said. Of the 7 rioters arrested Tuesday, only 4 were detained, 2 of them later released, and 1 turned out to be underage. All of the men arrested on suspicion of violent rioting and assaulting a public official were aged between 15 to 19, the police said. And then showed the burned out vans and so on. Anyway, Swedish Prime Minister Fredrik Reinfeldt on Tuesday commented on the matter, urging a halt to the violence, but acknowledged in the short term that may be unlikely. He says we have groups of young men who think that they can and should change society with violence. He says, let's be clear, this is not okay. We cannot be ruled by violence, Reinfeldt said, as cited by the local. He also urged everyone, including parents and adults, to help restore calm. Husby residents must get their neighbourhood back, he says, speaking of the district where around 80%, about 11,000 residents are first or second generation immigrants. This particular district has seen employment increasing and crime falling in the last 7 years because there's a massive program to get work going for them too. It says Reinfeldt added, speaking of the right decision and direction it's been going into. Police, and it shows you that but not everyone agreed with Reinfeldt's assessment of immigrant-populated Swedish districts' development, with critics saying the integration policies of the country and of the whole of Western Europe are not working. And it says, there's a clear consequence of this multiculturalism politics that Sweden adopted around the 80s and increased in the 90s. And this is not a unique one single occasion. We've had these ethnic-based riots against Swedish authorities. We've seen this in Western Europe, and they've had it in Britain too, with the Brixton riots in the late 70s and so on, and other ones since then. He says that is very sad, and I think we will see more of this if we don't change the politics. The chairman of the Sweden's National Democrats Party, Mark Abramson, told the RT. While not elaborating on the incident that caused the current riots, Abramson said all such incidents have a common problem smouldering beneath. That is immigrants not identifying themselves with the country's society, nor adopting or accepting the country's authorities, sticking only to their own ethnic group. And that's a fact. A lot of the countries are bringing in are collectivist societies who stick to their own groups. So Sweden has been trying harder than any one of the countries in Europe to try to push for integration. We've invested virtually billions from taxpayers' money into it. We've tried everything the scientists have presented, and still it's not working, the politician argued. They live in their area, and they feel their area is their own. And when the police arrive, they feel they're being intruded into their sort of country, their territory. The police who work in these areas, they have to be in 2 cars, one protecting the other. People are trying to maintain buildings to have security guards. The fire department can't work. They get attacked by angry immigrant youth that feel like they're intruding into their own area, even though they're trying to help, Abramson went on to say. And it says, and it showed different photographs of the policemen trying to secure buildings and put the fires out and so on. But this is the effect that had to happen as well. And believe you me, there's other agitators from other groups who are professional agitators that also keep it going. That's another big part of it too, who are really pushing for much, much more multicultural immigration for a different purpose. For a different purpose, folks. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, and we hear lots of stories, of course, that like trivia to a lot of people. Eventually we get so much dished at us all the time of data, and sometimes we get something horrific, etc. Like yesterday, of course, you had the slaughtering in Woolwich in England with the 2 guys that basically made a public execution of a soldier that was off duty to protest the British involvement going over to Afghanistan and other countries, killing Muslims. That's what it was. It was a public execution. You'd think it was Rwanda you were into, with the knives and so on, slashing away. Anyway, we also forget what happens at home as well. And I can remember going through some of the history of the CIA to do with many of the tests that we're doing at home over many, many years, not just MK Ultra, but they also continue with that under many different guises. And because the whole thing is for the CIA is to get total control of the populations. And they even hired thousands of prostitutes in the US and set them up in apartments, and they had them all film gear set up too. And the whole idea was to have the prostitutes test different drugs on their various clients and watch what happened. This went on for about 30 years. I mean, how much footage do you need to know if these drugs work or not? I mean, what's it really all about? We never get the full story, never will get the full story. But you see, the CIA is not there to help America any more than MI6 is really there to help Britain either. It's completely taken over, and actually they were set up by people who really were not, put this way, nationalistic at all, didn't really have loyalty to a country, in a sense. Anyway, the tests go on all the time. Now, last year, people remember, I hope, that there's all this cannibalism that was mentioned in the media happening at home in the US, and they blamed it on bath salts and all this kind of stuff. And it's the first time a lot of people had heard of this chemical they use, they call bath salts. Which isn't really bath salts at all. But anyway, it says, for the one where the first one that really broke out and caught the public's attention was with a man who ended up completely naked with another man, stripped his clothes off and beat him up and started eating him. And no one remembers what happened about that, because that's how fast things go in and out of your mind today, you see. It says, Miami Cannibal victim, the one who had his eyes actually taken out of him too, learning to play guitar as part of treatment a year after most of his face was chewed off in the horrific attack. He was a hobo, the guy apparently. Ronald Poppo almost died after his attack by Rudy Eugene. He was left blind, completely blind, both eyes were gone, lost his nose as well in the frenzied assault in May last year. Mr. Poppo works with the occupational therapist on how to take care of himself, and he's learning guitar and practices every day. It says he thanked people for the support over the past year. Now, you should see the photographs in this, because this guy had no expensive plastic surgery, obviously. And it's something else to see the mess this guy's left in. But the interesting part is too, is that the little bits that they put out there without going any further about them. And, from the history of the perpetrator who caused this to happen, who did it and who was shot by the police, and the act of eating the fella, they haven't said what caused it. He had no history of this thing, anything like this before. And yet he goes crazy in a park. They've tested his blood and all, but he was not on drugs. He did not have these so-called bath salts in him either. And there's been no explanation given whatsoever. And it isn't until you go into the different drugs they tested for the military do you get anything possibly coming close to this kind of thing happening. Because even when they made the movie Jacob's Ladder, it was based on the fact that the US had been testing various drugs on soldiers in special settings to make them into the ultimate drug-induced, crazy, nasty, horrific warriors you can imagine. And different drugs were tried on them, and the problem was decided to attack each other on the same side and kill each other. The stuff was tried on monkeys too, and it made them all rip each other apart. So it makes you wonder what else is still going on, because something was behind that whole spate of things that happened, and it died down right away too. But as I say, it was all the hype about the guy being on bath salts, and yet it comes now it comes out that he wasn't on anything at all. Nothing was found in his bloodstream except some marijuana. Now, marijuana does not make you go wild and start eating people. It's the opposite. So something else was involved here. And often with these chemicals too, unless you know what you're looking for, you won't find it if it's not on the list, you see.